When you are weak, appear strong.
Sun Tzu wrote that over 2,000 years ago in his military treatise, The Art of War. And while The Art of War is best known for, well, actual warfare, many of its lessons have been applied to negotiations, diplomacy, and politics in general. Now, what if I told you that the US military buildup off the coast of Venezuela is an implementation of this very lesson, a strategic performance of strength at a time when much of the world perceives the US to be in decline? With the rise of China on the global stage, the failure of NATO to defeat Russia in Ukraine, the inability to destroy the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the challenge of defeating Hamas in the besieged Gaza Strip, and the rapid inflation of the dollar, the American empire has never appeared weaker. Regardless of the fact that most of its military strength remains intact and that its GDP is still the highest in the world, the perception held by many is that the US is an empire in decline and that its fall is only a matter of time. And this perception isn't just felt internationally, it's felt domestically by Americans as well. This overall feeling of decline is what led to the election of Donald Trump, who ran on a very simple message: make America great again. The message itself implies that America is no longer great, and the people desperately want it to be so.
We will take back our country and we will make America great again.
Ever since Trump's re-election a year ago, the US has been desperately trying to reassert itself all around the world. In his first 6 months in office, Trump joined Israel in bombing Iran, escalated tensions with Russia by continuing to arm Ukraine, sanctioned half of the planet, threatened to annex both Canada and Greenland, and renamed the Department of Defense to the War Department. All of this is connected to Trump's campaign promise to make America great again. But this is more than just propaganda for a domestic audience of idiot plebs. It's also an attempt to remind the world who's actually in charge. In its latest effort to flex its strength, the US has set its sights on its South American enemy, Venezuela. The US has amassed a massive naval fleet off Venezuela's coast and has implemented a no-fly zone over the country. All things point towards a major US attack on the country. So the question currently on everyone's mind, is Trump actually serious about going to war with Venezuela? In this video, we will explore the US regime change plans for Venezuela and reveal what's at stake for the American empire. Because this isn't just another regime change operation by the United States. This is do or die for the American empire. Because the US finds itself in a rapidly evolving global economic system that it created but has already started leaving it behind. So this isn't business as usual for the military-industrial complex or the Pentagon. This is an operation that could determine the next world superpower for the next century. Whenever the US prepares for war or regime change, whether it's Iraq, Libya, Iran, and now Venezuela, the first strikes are always in the information space. The articles come before the airstrikes. Headlines propagandize the public, frame the narrative, and manufacture consent for whatever follows. To accurately predict which way things are going, I like to expose myself to all the propaganda. I've learned to read between the lines and see the intent behind the article. This is how I was able to predict the Israel-Iran war months before it happened. A great tool that helped me do that was Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that pulls in information from everywhere all at once and compares how different outlets, whether it's left, right, foreign, or domestic, are framing the same story, adding context like factuality and ownership so you can see the full picture. Because when Washington signals a new threat, you'll see the coverage shift in real time. Language gets coordinated. All of a sudden, the talking points start to rhyme. Ground News helps you expose that pattern. Let's take a look at this headline, for example. US military conducts 20-second strike on alleged drug boat in Eastern Pacific, killing 4 people. Ground News allows us to compare the bias across 237 articles reporting on this story. They summarize the bias comparison for us. Left-leaning outlets frame the military strike with skepticism. They question the lack of evidence for drug claims. Conversely, right-leaning coverage asserts the targets were narco-terrorists from a designated terrorist organization. The core divergence lies in portraying military action as either a scrutinized ethical dilemma or a justified national security measure against perceived threats. Now let's assess the accuracy courtesy of Ground News' bias comparison by taking a look at the way this right-leaning platform, Breitbart, reported the story. U.S. military strike kills 4 narco-terrorists, destroys drug vessel in Eastern Pacific. Just as Ground News told us in the bias comparison, the language that the right uses is decisive and justifies the strike. There is no room for doubt. To Breitbart, the boat was a drug vessel and the people who died were narco-terrorists. But Ground News takes us even deeper by letting me quickly see who owns Breitbart and how factual their article was. This information quickly tells me why the story is being presented in this way. And if you watch my channel, you already know this information is essential, which is why Ground News is such a valuable tool for me. In my opinion, everyone should be processing their information through a tool like Ground News. And now you have a great opportunity to do so. Ground News is giving my viewers a special offer of 40% off their subscription, making it incredibly affordable for such a valuable tool. All you need to do is use my link directly, which supports my channel and helps me cut through the propaganda. The link is on screen and in the description of this video. As I always say, everything is propaganda. You have to question everything. So to see the world the way it actually is, not the way you're told to, click the link groundnews.com/prop to save 40% off the Vantage subscription, which allows unlimited access to all of their features. To understand why the US is now threatening war with Venezuela, we first need to explore some basic history. Venezuela is a very unique country in South America. It carries the legacy of Simon Bolivar, the revolutionary who fought to liberate Latin America from European colonial rule. Bolivar did not just want independence for Venezuela. He wanted a united, sovereign South American continent, one strong enough to resist outside empires. That vision alone put Venezuela in ideological conflict with the United States, which has long viewed the Western Hemisphere as its sphere of influence under the Monroe Doctrine, a policy that essentially states this half of the planet belongs to us. Now, combine that historical and political legacy with Venezuela's vast amount of natural resources. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iraq, more than the United States. We are talking about at least $18 trillion in underground wealth, and that is just their oil. This does not include their gas, gold, iron, or other natural resources that are mostly untapped. For most of the 20th century, Venezuelan oil was controlled by a small elite aligned with US corporations and Western interests. The profits flowed upward into foreign banks and private pockets, while the majority of Venezuelans remained in poverty. In the 1970s, Arab states imposed an oil embargo in response to Israel's aggression against Egypt. This triggered a global oil shortage that sent prices skyrocketing. The Venezuelan elite benefited tremendously from this crisis, but it wouldn't last long. The sudden rise in oil prices pushed major economies into a recession, which forced many of these countries to seek alternative energy sources. This shift led to what is known as the oil glut of the 1980s, where global oil supply far exceeded the demand, causing prices to collapse to record lows. Because the vast majority of Venezuela's national revenue came from these oil exports, and because most of these profits flowed into the hands of a collaborating elite, the country was completely unprepared for the fallout of the oil price crash. The enormous profits from oil exports in the 1970s convinced the political elite that Venezuela could take on massive loans without consequence, the assumption being that the oil revenue would always be there to pay them back. But when oil prices collapsed in the 1980s, the Venezuelan government found itself in a predicament. They were now facing a severe budget deficit, runaway inflation, and a rapidly accelerating debt spiral where new loans had to be taken to pay off the old loans. At the time, Venezuela had international reserves of $300 million and a debt of $34 billion, with a poverty rate of 70%. It was a complete shit show. The Venezuelan government was trapped between the need to modernize their economy and pull their people out of poverty, while also addressing the debt crisis before it could further spiral out of control. International lenders like the IMF and World Bank offered to step in with even more loans, but on the condition that the government liberalize the economy and implement austerity measures. Simply put, austerity is when governments slash spending by reducing or outright cutting budgets for public services and subsidies. This is done either to balance the budget or to pay off the interest-bearing loans owed to institutions like the IMF or World Bank. But austerity isn't just cutting public spending. Sometimes, in order to appease the banks that now effectively own the economy, nations are required to liberalize the economy, or in other words, give up state control of key aspects of industry and hand them over to private corporations, usually with Western ownership and investment. Venezuela's president at the time, Carlos Andrés Pérez, won his second term by campaigning against austerity, promising to protect social programs and maintain subsidies. But once in office, he reversed course and implemented the very austerity measures he had condemned. Entire sectors of the economy were privatized, social spending was slashed, and most importantly, government fuel subsidies were completely dismantled. The most controversial part of the reform package was the removal of these gasoline subsidies that had kept domestic fuel prices far below international rates and even below production cost. To understand how drastic this was, you need a little bit of context. In oil-rich countries like Iran and Venezuela, government subsidies push gasoline prices to extremely low levels. For example, in Venezuela today, a gallon of gas costs just 8 cents. That's right, 8 cents. Meanwhile, where I live in Florida, that same gallon costs at least $2.85, which is 35 times more expensive. Now this sounds wonderful until you realize that the average salary per month in Venezuela is just $8. So gasoline has to be that cheap. Otherwise, people can't get around and the economy cannot function. So in a country where 70% of the population at the time was already living in poverty, the removal of these energy subsidies didn't just raise prices. It effectively paralyzed the poor and pushed an entire population to the brink. This sparked a nationwide uprising known as El Caracazo, where the government responded by massacring protesters in the streets for rejecting US-backed austerity. The political order that had governed Venezuela for decades had literally collapsed in legitimacy overnight. Born out of this chaos was a passionate military officer turned politician, Hugo Chavez. Chavez didn't come to power offering small reforms. He came offering revolution. He was Simon Bolivar reincarnated, and his fiery, energetic, passionate vision for Venezuela brought him to power. One of the first things he did was nationalize the oil industry, not in name, but in practice, forcing the state oil company PDVSA to stop operating like a private corporation serving Western energy markets and instead redistribute oil wealth to the Venezuelan people through healthcare, housing, education, and food programs. He called it the Bolivarian Revolution, explicitly linking his movement to Bolivar's dream of a sovereign, united, independent Latin America. Like Bolivar before him, Chavez didn't just want to liberate Venezuela from United States control. He wanted to free all of South America from the global neoliberal economic order. And that is how and why the conflict between the US and Venezuela became inevitable. Because when a nation with the largest oil reserves on Earth declares that its resources belong to its own people, not to Exxon, not to Chevron, not to the IMF, the World Bank, or Washington, that's not just disobedience. That is a direct threat to the American imperial strategy in the Western Hemisphere, a threat to the petrodollar, a threat to US geopolitical dominance, a threat to a 200-year-old doctrine that says Latin America must remain subordinate. And that, not democracy, not human rights, not corruption, not drugs, is why the United States has spent the last 2 decades trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela. Now, while it's true that the United States wants to look strong in the face of perceived weakness, this aggression towards Venezuela isn't just performative propaganda. The real reason Washington has now rapidly accelerated its regime change plans for Venezuela is because the global economic order is shifting fast. For the last 80 years, the United States has dominated the world through 2 main pillars: the dollar and control of global energy, primarily oil and gas. These 2 things are inseparable. You see, the dollar is strong because oil has exclusively been priced and traded in dollars globally. This is known as the petrodollar system. But that system has slowly been unraveling over the last last few years. Countries like China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, basically the BRICS nations, are actively building an alternative global financial system, one that does not rely on the US dollar in order to trade for commodities like oil and gas. China has already been signing oil trade deals in their own currency, the yuan. For example, just a few months ago in September, Saudi Arabia and China settled an oil transaction in the digital yuan. Even India has been purchasing Russian oil despite the sanctions using the Chinese yuan. To many, this is the beginning of the end of the dollar's hegemony. So the United States now has one urgent strategic priority: re-establish control over the world's largest remaining oil reserves in order to prevent more sales in non-dollar currencies. Those reserves are, guess where? Iran and Venezuela. Trillions of dollars of oil, enough to determine the future of global energy pricing, determine the world's reserve currency, and control over the Chinese economy, sits under governments that are not aligned with Washington. Even worse, Venezuela has been strengthening economic ties with China, Russia, and Iran, the three main challengers to US hegemony. Beijing has already invested heavily in Venezuelan infrastructure and oil extraction operations to the tune of $67 billion. Russia provides military equipment and intelligence support, and Iran advises Venezuela on how to bypass sanctions and protect against refinery sabotage. So from the perspective of the US national security establishment, Venezuela had crossed from disobedient to strategically dangerous, and time was quickly running out to prevent them from joining BRICS. Because if Venezuela, China, and the entire BRICS bloc began to finalize oil trade outside of the dollar system, it would have undermined the petrodollar, weakened US global financial power, accelerated the shift toward a multipolar world, and removed the economic basis of the US empire itself. So again, this is not about democracy, corruption, or even drug trafficking. This is about preventing global power from changing hands. So when the US positions its navy outside Venezuela today, it's not simply flexing for its domestic audience of idiot plebs. It is defending the core operating system of the American empire. Whoever controls Venezuelan oil in the next decade will have leverage in this new global economic order that is rapidly taking shape. That is why war is suddenly on the table. There have been many opposition figures over the years that the US has officially recognized as Venezuela's legitimate leadership. The most recent is Maria Corina Machado, who has been going viral recently, not only because she very controversially won the Nobel Peace Prize for her stated work to transition Venezuela from a dictatorship to a democracy, but also for her viral clips where she promises to give Venezuelan resources to the United States.
We will open Venezuela for foreign investment. I am talking about a $1.7 trillion opportunity, not only in oil and gas, which is huge, and you know that the opportunities, because we will open all upstream, middle stream, downstream to all companies, but also in mining, in gold, in infrastructure, power. We will open markets, we will have security for foreign investment, and a transparent, massive privatization program that is waiting for you.
Do you support US military strikes on the territory of Venezuela as part of what you call a process?
I believe that the increase in pressure and the escalation that's taking place is the only way to force Maduro to understand that it's time to go.
Simply put, she's a sellout, which essentially confirms what this entire conflict is about. Oil, money, the dollar, China, the future of the US empire. Now, to be clear, the US isn't just suddenly attempting regime change in Venezuela. They've actually been trying for the last 20 years. Shortly after Hugo Chavez took power, Washington began imposing sanctions on Venezuela, and those sanctions have been gradually intensified ever since. The sanctions, combined with poor economic policies by the Venezuelans themselves, has pushed the country into a deep crisis. crisis, hyperinflation, violent riots, and multiple coup attempts. After decades of sanctions and covert meddling, the US now plans to turn up the heat to its most extreme point. Just like they did with Iran, the US will test the strength of the Venezuelan regime by assassinating key figures and delivering strikes on infrastructure. The United States recently deployed its largest and newest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, which is a carrier capable of launching and supporting over 75 aircraft on its own. And with the recent order to vacate the skies over Venezuela, Trump has already set the stage for aerial strikes deep inside the country. Only time will tell if Venezuela can survive this showdown, but one thing is certain: the United States is very serious, and it will continue to escalate as far as it needs to in order to overthrow the Venezuelan government. So what do you think? Let me know in the comment section. Before you go, I want to give a very special shout out to the sponsor of this video, Ground News. So click the link and let's continue to slice through the propaganda together. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care of yourselves.
Trust nothing.